draconian punishments that North Korea imposes upon people who are caught doing one of the most grave sins imaginable.
죄수들은 더 이상 사람이 아니며
Imagine living in a place where freedom is just an empty word, where constant fear and suffering are the norm. In North Korea, prisons are not just a punishment, but a hell from which few manage to escape. In this video, we take you inside these terrible prisons where the punishments are so extreme that they defy the imagination. From forced labor to unimaginable physical torture, prisoners live a daily nightmare.
그 남자 앞에서 졸랑 헐딱 벗긴다는 그.
Did you know that a simple slip-up could lead you to a life of endless suffering? Prepare to discover the horrors hidden within North Korea's prisons, a reality that is as terrifying as it is shocking. 3-generation punishment. Imagine being born into a situation where you are already trapped, with no way out. In North Korea, there is an extremely cruel policy called the 3-generation punishment. This practice ensures that if a family member commits an offense against the regime, not only that person but also their children, parents, and even grandchildren will suffer the consequences. The idea behind this policy, implemented by Kim Jong-il in 1972, is to create a culture of absolute fear. The repression is not limited to the individual, but extends to their entire family, condemning them to a life of suffering and forced labor. Those sentenced to labor camps often face 20-hour workdays, with minimal food rations, usually consisting of contaminated water, rotting leftovers, or, if they're lucky, small wild animals they must hunt to survive. Testimonies from released prisoners reveal that the conditions are brutal. One former prisoner of these labor camps describes their life as an endless sentence.
I just thought those people who carry guns were born to carry guns, and prisoners like me were born as prisoners.
Life in these camps is almost worse than death itself. Many struggle to survive with deteriorating health and no medical care, and some succumb to easily preventable diseases. The hope of changing their fate is remote, and entire generations within the same family become trapped in a cycle of continuous suffering. This policy represents not only a form of social control, but also a heartbreaking reminder of the ability of totalitarian regimes to destroy lives. Not just the guilty, but also those who simply happen to be their relatives. What do you think? Is it fair that generations of a family pay for the crimes of a single member? The cruel logic behind this policy keeps families trapped in a spiral of despair with no hope of escape. Human experimentation, the horror of the labor camps. The North Korean regime not only punishes its prisoners with forced labor and inhumane conditions. In a shocking report that has emerged from defectors and survivors, it has been revealed that the regime also conducts terrifying human experiments on prisoners in its infamous labor camps. These experiments include tests with nerve agents, poisons, gases, and chemicals, representing a brutal violation of human rights. Prisoners have been exposed to extreme radiation and deadly diseases as part of these experiments in an attempt to test the effectiveness of biological and chemical weapons. One of the most chilling accounts comes from a witness who saw an entire family, 2 parents and their 2 children, placed inside a glass chamber filled with poisonous gas. As the family agonized, North Korean scientists watched and recorded their reactions without any remorse. But the horrors don't stop with poisonous gas. Other prisoners have spoken of being subjected to grotesque medical procedures without anesthesia, such as organ extractions and amputations. The regime justifies these acts as part of scientific research and medical testing, but in reality, it is about improving their military capabilities at the expense of human lives. The The most disturbing aspect of all is that these practices are reminiscent of the inhumane medical experiments carried out by Nazi doctors during World War II, a dark chapter in history that is repeating itself in the 21st century. This use of prisoners as human test subjects demonstrates just how little value human life holds in the regime of Kim Jong-un. The international community cannot turn a blind eye to these atrocities. The victims of these experiments deserve justice, and it is imperative that the world holds the regime accountable. We cannot allow this barbarism to continue without consequences. Isolation as a form of control. Another of the cruelest punishments in North Korean prisons is extreme isolation. Many prisoners are sent to solitary cells where sensory deprivation, lack of human contact, and total isolation are part of their daily suffering. In these re-education centers, prisoners not only endure physical torture, but are also subjected to psychological torment that destroys their will. The extreme loneliness causes many to lose track of time and fall into a state of deep despair. This isolation has a very clear purpose: to break the person both physically and mentally. For the regime, a broken prisoner is a controlled prisoner. Many who have gone through these experiences have spoken about the sense of depersonalization and dehumanization they feel as they are stripped of their identity and reduced to mere objects in the regime's oppressive system. The fear of escape. Consequences for families. If escaping from North Korean prisons is nearly impossible, the consequences for those who try to flee are devastating. Not only does the person who escapes face almost certain death, but their entire family is brutally punished. Some defectors have recounted how North Korean authorities have retaliated against their families, sending them to labor camps as punishment for the shame of the escape. Even those who have no direct relation to the fugitive, such as cousins or neighbors, can be arrested and sent to concentration camps. This system of collective punishment not only acts as a deterrent to escape, but also creates an atmosphere of absolute fear in every corner of North Korean society. No one dares to speak, question, or even think of a life outside because the consequences are too severe. Censorship of communication. In North Korea, communication is under extremely strict control by the government. Any attempt to interact freely or share external information is considered a subversive act. State ideology dominates every word exchanged, and the consequences for challenging it are severe. This was reflected in a recent case from October 2023, when a 60-year-old woman was arrested for trying to speak by phone to her daughter, who had escaped to South Korea years earlier. The mother was sentenced to 3 years in prison for simply trying to reconnect with her family. The person who helped her make the call was sentenced to 1 year of forced labor, and the entire family was sent to a concentration camp, a common punishment in such cases. The North Korean government not only regulates communication among citizens, but also the technologies they use. Possessing an unauthorized device, such as a mobile phone, computer, or radio, can be interpreted as an attempt to spy, leading to severe punishment. The regime, deeply paranoid, ensures that no North Korean can access content that might challenge its political system. Books, foreign films, and any materials from outside are treated as dangerous threats. The penalties for violating these restrictions range from forced labor to execution. Despite the oppression, some citizens have found ways to smuggle prohibited materials, such as USB drives containing films, music, or information from other countries. These digital dissidents take enormous risks to obtain a view of the world beyond the regime's borders. However, those who are caught face horrific consequences. Their resistance, though brave, demonstrates the continued need for connection and information, even in a regime of such control. The horrible fate of the executed. Another disturbing aspect of North Korean control is the treatment of the bodies of executed prisoners. It has been reported that, in some cases, the bodies of the condemned are thrown into cages full of hungry dogs. This macabre practice is not limited to ordinary citizens, but has also been applied to members of the leader's inner circle, including high-ranking government officials. The case of Jang Song-taek, Kim Jong-un's uncle, is one of the most notorious. In 2013, Jang was executed for alleged crimes against the state. After a summary trial with no guarantees, he was shot. But the most chilling part was what happened afterward. His body was stripped of its clothing and thrown into a cage with dogs to be devoured. This brutal act was interpreted as a message to the North Korean people. There is no immunity, not even for those within the circle of power. This kind of punishment reflects the level of psychological and physical violence employed by the regime to maintain absolute control. In 2019, several officials from North Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs faced a similar fate after being accused of betraying the state by selling secrets to the United States. Although they denied the accusations, they were executed and their bodies were treated in the same manner as those of ordinary prisoners thrown to the dogs. This inhumane treatment not only underscores the impunity of the regime, but also the brutality of the measures used to silence its opponents. The war against K-pop. The rise of K-pop, South Korean popular music, has become a global cultural phenomenon. But in North Korea, this phenomenon has been seen as a direct threat to the regime. The North Korean government considers K-pop to be a vicious cancer that could undermine the state's control over the population, especially because it offers young people an escape from the rigid and monotonous cultural environment imposed by the regime. Since K-pop began gaining traction in North Korea, young people have quickly become hooked on the catchy songs and vibrant idols of groups like BTS and Blackpink. However, the regime has not taken this popularity lightly. In 2020, Kim Jong-un called K-pop a cultural threat and enacted new laws that impose severe punishments on those caught enjoying South Korean music or entertainment. In 2022, a young man was publicly executed for sharing K-pop songs, a fact that highlights the regime's paranoia towards any form of cultural expression that does not align with its principles. Furthermore, the guilt by association law has led to entire families being sent to concentration camps simply for the transgression of one member, creating a climate of terror in which no one dares show a preference for foreign things. K-pop fans around the world can enjoy concerts and events, while young North Koreans must hide their desire to belong to that world of freedom and fun, fearing that a simple mistake will lead to brutal punishment. Despite these efforts at repression, K-pop remains a form of cultural resistance for North Koreans, representing a connection to the outside world and a life of freedom that is denied to them. This phenomenon underscores a universal truth. Even in the most oppressive regimes, culture and personal expression have tremendous power to challenge totalitarian control. However, in North Korea, the price of defying censorship is extremely high, and cultural persecution has become one of the regime's most effective strategies to suffocate any attempt at subversion. Public executions. In North Korea, living under the constant threat of death is an integral part of daily life. Public executions are one of the most direct and brutal methods the regime uses to instill fear and ensure obedience. These events are not only acts of extreme violence, but also grotesque spectacles meant to show the population what happens to those who deviate from the regime. The reasons for these executions vary, from political dissent to minor infractions, such as watching foreign television. In fact, a simple misstep, like speaking negatively about Kim Jong-un, can be enough to lead to death. During an execution, the condemned person is typically placed on a public platform with a sign describing their crimes. Everyone, including children, is forced to witness the act as a terrifying warning. This could be your fate if you step out of line. The execution is not just a form of punishment, but a tactic of intimidation designed to silence any form of dissent. In this climate of fear, any individual can become the regime's target, including high-ranking officials who, upon losing favor with the leader, face the same extreme consequences. These executions send a clear message to the population. Keep your head down and avoid attracting attention if you want to survive. The constant threat of death creates an atmosphere of terror that suppresses any attempt at resistance or change. This system of control reinforces the regime's absolute authority, trapping society in a cycle of fear where speaking or thinking freely becomes unthinkable. The murder of Kim Jong-nam. On the international stage, North Korea's regime has shown that its willingness to eliminate those it perceives as threats knows no bounds. The murder of Kim Jong-nam, Kim Jong-un's half-brother, is one of the most shocking cases. Kim Jong-nam had been exiled and had publicly criticized the regime, making him a target for the North Korean government. In February 2017, Kim Jong-nam was attacked at Kuala Lumpur International Airport by two women who used VX nerve agent, an extremely lethal substance. The public nature of the murder, carried out in a busy airport, not only displayed the regime's audacity, but also its contempt for international norms. By using foreign citizens to carry out the assassination, North Korea was able to claim plausible deniability, complicating the international community's response. This event served as a grim warning about the regime's readiness to resort to violence even beyond its borders to eliminate any perceived threat. Kwanliso camps. One of the darkest aspects of North Korea is the Kwanliso camps, known as zones of absolute control. These facilities, which house over 120,000 people, are the destination for those who fall out of favor with the regime. Prisoners in these camps are subjected to inhumane conditions, working up to 18 hours a day in coal mines, receiving an insufficient diet that barely meets their nutritional needs, and having no access to medical care. Malnutrition and torture are common, and many prisoners do not survive the harsh conditions. Despite the magnitude of this tragedy, the North Korean government denies the existence of these camps, calling them false rumors and insisting that there are no political prisoners in the country. However, witness testimonies and satellite images showing barbed wire and watchtowers tell a very different story. The cases of people who have escaped these camps have shed light on the suffering that occurs in these hidden places, but the regime remains committed to its denial. One of the most well-known cases is that of Otto Warmbier, a US student detained for attempting to steal a poster from a store in North Korea. Warmbier spent over a year in one of these camps before being released in 2017. His return to the United States was tragic, as he died shortly after being freed due to the brutalities he endured in prison. His death brought greater awareness to the abuses occurring in these camps and exposed the brutality of the North Korean regime. The use of anti-aircraft guns to execute the disfavored. In a macabre twist on the phrase "making a statement," the North Korean regime has used anti-aircraft guns, originally designed to destroy enemy aircraft, as execution tools for those who fall out of favor within the government. The most famous case occurred in 2015, when it was reported that General Haeon Yong-chol, the former defense minister, was executed by an anti-aircraft gun after being accused of treason and disobeying orders. The execution was so brutal that there was nothing left of him to be recognized. But it's not only high-ranking military officers who fall victim to this brutal fate. In 2016, two senior ministers, Ah Yong-jin, Minister of Education, and Hwang Min, Minister of Agriculture, were also executed in the same manner. Ah Yong-jin, who had fallen asleep during a meeting with Kim Jong-un, and Hwang Min, who proposed policies that were not well received by the regime, became terrifying examples of what happens to anyone who deviates from the leader's expectations. The use of anti-aircraft guns not only highlights the regime's brutality, but also underscores Kim Jong-un's absolute control over life and death in the country. The consequences of a simple mistake are deadly, and the constant threat of execution for any failure to comply keeps the entire population in a state of perpetual fear. Freedom of movement. In North Korea, freedom of movement is one of the strictest in the world. The regime thoroughly controls where citizens can go, both within the country and when traveling abroad. To travel within the country, citizens must obtain official permission, a complicated process dependent on the social classification system known as Songbun. This system ranks individuals based on their loyalty to the regime and their family background, creating a rigid social hierarchy. Attempting to escape the country without the proper documentation can result in severe punishments, such as imprisonment or forced labor. For those with a lower social status, in the Songbun system, restrictions are even more severe, making travel virtually impossible. Even for those with stronger connections to the regime, travel abroad is tightly controlled, and their families may be held as hostages to ensure their return. This total control over movement creates an atmosphere of isolation, where citizens are deprived of the basic human right to explore the world beyond their borders. For many, the possibility of escaping is a distant dream, but those who do manage to flee face new challenges outside the country, such as cultural and linguistic barriers and the emotional burden of leaving behind such an oppressive regime. Forced labor camps. The forced labor camps in North Korea are one of the most terrifying tools of social control. There, political prisoners and anyone deemed disloyal by the regime are subjected to forced labor for up to 20 hours a day in coal mines, forests, and factories. The conditions are extreme, with minimal food rations consisting of only a few hundred grams of corn per day, insufficient to keep a person alive and healthy. The grueling labor and total lack of medical care result in a high rate of malnutrition, disease, and death from exhaustion. Prisoners, often deprived of any assistance, resort to eating insects, rodents, and even grass to quell their hunger. Those who survive are left with permanent physical and psychological scars, a mark they can never remove. The fear of being sent to these camps is so great that it keeps the population under constant surveillance. Even the smallest mistake can result in someone being sent to one of these hells. The regime insists that these camps are labor training centers, despite the overwhelming evidence and testimonies from those who have survived these atrocities. Chronic hunger and psychological abuse are part of the punishment, and prisoners are subjected to inhumane treatment within a power structure that does not tolerate dissent. Punishment for Western clothing. In North Korea, clothing not only reflects personal style, but is strictly controlled by the regime. Jeans, especially those of Western style, are seen as symbols of capitalism and American influence, which the government considers ideological enemies. This worldview has led to a rigorous ban on Western clothing, as the regime fears that foreign fashion could encourage citizens to think independently and question the system. The consequences for wearing Western clothing, such as jeans, are severe. Citizens caught wearing such attire may face punishments ranging from fines and imprisonment to forced labor. In extreme cases, the death penalty may be imposed. North Korean authorities view Western fashion as a threat to social order and to the ideology promoted by the regime. Ironically, many of the banned clothes are produced within the country itself. North Korea has a textile industry that manufactures modern clothing, which is exported to international markets, including the United States and Europe. This contradiction reveals the disconnection between the regime's internal policies and its economic interests. The control over clothing goes beyond fashion. It serves as a tool of social control, The regime promotes uniformity, encouraging the population to wear traditional Korean clothing or simple, functional attire that doesn't stand out. In North Korea, individuality is viewed with suspicion, and authorities ensure that everyone adheres to the same standard to avoid any form of dissent. Thus, clothing becomes another form of social discipline, where obedience to the regime is reflected in every garment worn. Punishment for smiling. In North Korea, emotions are also under strict control, especially on July 8th, the day of mourning for the death of Kim Il-sung, the founder of the country. This day is marked by mandatory collective mourning, and any sign of joy, such as smiling or laughing, is severely punished. For the regime, this forced mourning is a way to maintain ideological unity and social control. July 8th is not just a day of remembrance, but an act of conformity. Citizens must display sadness, visit statues of Kim Il-sung, and avoid any activities that deviate from the mourning norm. The consequences for failing to comply with these rules are severe. Those caught smiling or showing happiness can face arrest, forced labor, and even execution, depending on the severity of the crime. This control over emotions reflects the totalitarian nature of the regime, which not only controls the actions and thoughts of its citizens, but also dictates what they are allowed to feel. North Koreans must conceal any signs of joy, even if they do not genuinely feel sadness. The emotional repression creates an atmosphere of paranoia, where any display of happiness can be seen as a threat to the regime. July 8th serves as a reminder of how the North Korean government manages daily life, forcing citizens to suppress their emotions in favor of state ideology. In an environment where emotional freedom is limited, North Koreans live under constant pressure to conform to the regime's expectations, always under the watchful eye of authorities. Punishment for corruption. In North Korea, corruption is seen as one of the most serious threats to the stability of the regime. Due to its totalitarian nature, the North Korean government does not tolerate any acts of dishonesty or abuse of power, especially when it involves officials of the Workers' Party. The regime's response is extremely harsh. Punishment for corruption not only seeks to penalize the offender, but also to send a clear message to the population about the consequences of challenging the system's norms. In the most notorious cases, punishment can be fatal. Public executions are a common method used by the regime to illustrate the seriousness of the crime and ruthlessly show that there is no place for corruption within its power structures. These executions are usually highly publicized and are designed to intimidate others who might be considering similar acts. Authorities do not hesitate to apply the death penalty to those deemed a threat to the party's control. However, for those not in high-ranking positions, the punishment remains brutal. Many involved in smaller-scale corruption acts are sent to the infamous forced labor camps. In these camps, the conditions are extremely harsh. Prisoners face long hours of exhausting labor, insufficient food, and no medical care. Many do not survive the harsh conditions, and physical and psychological suffering is pervasive. These camps also serve as a warning to the rest of the population, particularly those with some form of power or influence. The idea is to keep everyone under control, ensuring that no one dares to challenge the regime's norms. Another common punishment is the confiscation of wealth obtained through corrupt practices. Any property or money acquired illicitly is quickly seized by the government, stripping the guilty parties of their ill-gotten gains. Additionally, imprisonment is a frequent sentence, especially when convictions are handed down to forced labor camps where life conditions are extremely tough. Prison sentences are long and indefinite, creating an atmosphere of fear and hopelessness among those who might consider falling into corruption. The system of guilt by association is also a pillar of the regime. In many cases, if a person is convicted of corruption, the consequences are not limited to them. The punishment can extend to their families, who may be exiled, lose their jobs, or even be imprisoned. This collective punishment reinforces fear within society, as any individual action can have severe consequences for an entire family. This policy of retaliation serves as another tool of control, ensuring that everyone conforms to the regime's strict rules. Public humiliation is another tool of repression. The regime ensures that corruption cases are widely broadcast through state-controlled media. Those convicted are shown to the public as examples of what happens to those who transgress the party's rules. Public humiliation serves as a deterrent, creating an environment of constant surveillance and fear. North Korea's judicial system is opaque and operates arbitrarily. There are no procedural guarantees or real due process. Corruption charges can be used by the regime to eliminate political rivals or purge those who pose a threat to power. Accusations of corruption, therefore, become a political tool to consolidate the leader's control rather than to deliver true justice. The severity of punishment for corruption in North Korea reflects the totalitarian nature of the regime, which relies on absolute control and fear to maintain power. Corruption, although often inevitable in authoritarian systems, is viewed as a direct challenge to the leader's authority and therefore is punished harshly. By controlling not only public life, but also the private and emotional lives of its citizens, Kim Jong-un's regime continues to reinforce an environment where fear is the norm. The brutalities of this justice system remind us of the importance of transparency, freedom, and human rights in any society. While these stories are only a glimpse into the darkness of the North Korean regime, it is essential to keep focus on the injustices that continue to unfold. By raising awareness, we can work together to end this oppression and promote human dignity worldwide. Thank you for watching this video as we explored the harsh realities faced by prisoners in North Korea. The stories we have shared are just a glimpse into the suffering and brutality that exist in this closed regime. It is crucial to raise awareness about these injustices, as they often go unnoticed in global human rights discourse. If you found this video insightful, please like, share, and subscribe for more content shedding light on important global issues. Together, we can amplify the voices of those suffering and work towards a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Stay informed, and until next time, take care.